All right, so the Fed faces choices as challenging as any since the 1970s. Too much delay in monetary policy tightening risks a much bigger response as the central bank catches up with inflation. As economies continue their transition from an adrenaline-fueled liftoff to more self-sustaining growth, policymakers will increasingly be confronted with choices as challenging as any since the 1970s. Can I pause and mention and notice how metaphorical these writers are? Ooh, so metaphorical, right? They're all like, oh, there's constant use of metaphors and colorful language to try to express what's going on. I think it's in part because they don't understand what's happening. Or it might also be because, otherwise it would be super boring and nobody would read it. The monetary and fiscal stimulation, I'm tired and bored already. The monetary and fiscal stimulation that was applied during the pandemic and earlier in the US and most developed economies boosted incomes, filled wealth gaps, and raised household wealth. Importantly, that spending resulted from this is measured in nominal terms before taking into account inflation. That is all connected to the nominal flow of credit that initially came from the expansion of government credit finance by printing money. How that nominal spending divides between real gross domestic product and inflation depends on the quantity produced. This is hardly written. Okay, I'm not even going to continue. But it's good to know that somebody's paying attention. That inflation is high and it's becoming an important issue amongst policymakers, and that's why I spend the second half of the semester with you all thinking about how the Fed works. Was that He covered his eyes with his mask, y'all. He's ashamed to be in the room while I do this. Okay. Too many buttons on this thing right here. But this. Hello. Where's the pin? I don't want to leave meeting, cancel. Stop share. Okay. Struggle. Do you all have any logistical questions for me about stuff? Get through the homeworks. Review Saturday night. Okay. Are there any super challenging parts? Super annoying parts. I did not get many emails except for emails about the logarithm thing. Hopefully everybody figured that out. We'll see. I think I talked about it enough. Thursday, February 24th, James Otteson from Notre Dame University is going to be in the house. He's going to be giving a talk on honorable business. There's a common belief that businesses should give back to society. Is business an activity that requires giving back? Is it a sin for which business executives should atone? Or is it possible that honorable business activity could have value in itself? I am strongly biased about this issue myself, but I don't think it's all bias. I think part of it's having thought it through some. It'd be interesting to hear him come talk about it. So 10 extra credit points for showing out Thursday, February 24th at 5 p.m. WB 144 downstairs. And there will be a question on Canvas for you to answer about his talk after he's given it in order to get those extra credit points. And there will be a swipe to get in as well. Okay. I got to chapter 19 last week, loosely. Chapter 19 or chapter 20 in your text, which was about consumption, and then other micro foundations issues for macro. Today, we're going to get to what I should have gotten to earlier on chapter 6 to talk a little bit about international trade and spending, I think it's interesting that this chapter doesn't really talk about trade at all. Right? This chapter talks about flows of imports and exports and how those flows impact the overall economy from monetary and interest rate point of view, right? So the concerns are with trade balances and trade flows and capital account balances and capital account flows as compared to concerns about trade. I think it's more important to be interested in trade than it is to be interested in this stuff. But the main reason why people will get interested in the stuff that comes up in chapter 6 is that foreign flows can mess up any of the technical attempts to try to intervene in the marketplace by the government or by the Fed. Or in other words, you might not be able to get what you had hoped for by your interventions due to leakages through the foreign markets. So the foreign exchange stuff that goes on in chapter 6 complicates the overall analysis that we've done in chapters 1 through 5 and how things are impacted in chapter 7 and then so on. The thing that's more interesting to me is a couple of things. First of all, in your intro courses, you did something like, lattes and scones, right? And you did something like where Sean and Gus are working at the local coffee shop. Of course, there's a pineapple in the background there because it's Sean and Gus, but right, they're making scones and lattes, and Sean can produce either 6 scones or 6 lattes an hour, while Bacon McBiscuit, we'll call it Bacon McBiscuit, Sean. You guys get the Sean and Gus reference at all? Nobody? No? Nobody watched Psych? No? Somebody watched Psych. Okay, Sean and Gus. Okay. Well, Gus can either make 9 scones or 12 lattes. Right? The question is, who should do what? Right? And this is all comparative advantage stuff, right? And the trick is to recognize that the slopes of these two lines are different from one another, and that those slopes are basically ratios that help to understand the opportunity cost of doing one action in terms of the other action. So for Sean, the opportunity cost of 1 scone is 1 latte, right? For Gus, the opportunity cost of 1 scone is 4/3 lattes. And so who is the lower opportunity cost producer of scones? Sean is. So Sean should produce scones, and Gus should specialize in production of lattes, and then they'll be able to maximize their output and exchange, and they're both made better off. This comparative advantage analysis, is based upon this basic framework that starts with, 2 goods and then tries to find out what the production possibility from here for each individual is. Right? So I said Sean was 6 and 6, 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 9, 12. Gus was 9 and 12. Well, what would their total be? What's their total production? We can take 6 plus 9 and say that's 15. And we can take 6 plus 12 and say that's 18. And we could say, if Schwann and Gus only produced scones, together they could produce 15 scones. And if Schwann and Gus together produced only lattes, they could together produce 18 lattes. And we might suppose then that their combined production possibility frontier would be the line that connects those two. Are you with me so far? Okay, is this right or wrong? I'm asking, it's probably wrong, right? Well, the thing is this, that we have to consider that this slope here is not equal to either this slope or this slope. Instead, it's helpful to notice that for Gus, if for every 3 scones he doesn't give up, or he doesn't make, he can make 4 lattes. So if Gus gives up making 9 scones and makes lattes instead, he can make 12 lattes. And it turns out that 12 is out here. That this point is outside of their combined production possibility frontier. If you do it on graph paper or whatever, such that what we would really find is that this would be Guster's comparative advantage, and this would be Schwann's comparative advantage, and that as they combine, their combined production possibility frontier is greater than the sum of each of their production possibility frontiers together. And what happens is, as you add more and more people to the mix, the production possibility frontier for all of society bows out as each person identifies their comparative advantage and participates in the overall economy in doing that. Now, here's the puzzle, though. All right, here's the puzzle. Okay, if people can specialize wherever it is that they happen to live, why do we need to trade with other countries? David Ricardo developed these early models of comparative advantage. Ricardo was working roughly a generation after Adam Smith, one of the earliest political economists. Okay, and he talked a lot about trade across countries, and he'd be like, Portugal trades with England, right? Portugal sends wine, and England sends wool, and both are made better off as a result, right? Okay. Maybe the climate in Portugal does not lend itself very well to growing sheep, and maybe the climate in England does not lend itself very well to the growing of grapes. Okay. In that case, it would make sense for Portugal to do most of the production of grapes and England to do most of the production of sheep, but does that necessarily mean that England should do the production of wool? You can think about Florida as being geographically a good region within which to grow oranges. Oh my God, did I hit record? I did, okay, good. Right. Does that mean that orange juice should necessarily be produced in Florida? It depends. Depends on what? Well, on the costs of transportation and the availability of electricity or other forms of energy sources for squeezing oranges. Right? If you could transport barges full of oranges up the seacoast from Florida to Maryland, for example, right? And if there's a hydroelectric generator next to a river in Maryland that produces a lot of electricity very, very inexpensively. You put a factory right next to that river to make orange juice. It might be less expensive on net to take the oranges from Florida, ship them to Maryland, squeeze them, and then make the orange juice there. I don't think we've gotten there yet, but it could be. If that's the case, then the location where raw materials are extracted becomes less and less relevant as our economy becomes more and more developed, and as the stages of production get more and more advanced, and as the final goods that consumers buy become farther and farther removed from the production of raw materials, such that the comparative advantage of one country relative to another, in terms of geographical benefits, becomes less and less relevant in the long run to what it is that people make in different countries. Are you following my logic here? I haven't read this anywhere. I'm thinking about this. And I'm trying to puzzle this out. If all that's true, then it doesn't matter where people live. They will make things wherever they are. Most of what we buy does get shipped to us, but that need not necessarily be the case. Does that then mean that, oh, because we can make anything anywhere, we should close our borders to trade? Well, if it's going to be cheaper to make something here anyway, then what good does closing the border do? It's a non-binding constraint in that sense. It doesn't do anything to the flow of things. How can we know whether something is worth doing locally or somewhere else? Prices tell us. Prices tell us. We can't know until we try. Prices will tell us. So the justification of comparative advantage that Ricardo used came to be employed by others besides Ricardo to try to imply that actually it wasn't anything about the geography of Portugal or England. It was something about the characteristics of the Portuguese relative to the characteristics of the English. They tried to turn it into something racial, something different about the different races of people in different places. That this race of people is good at doing this kind of work, and that race of people is good at doing that kind of work. There wasn't the geography, it was the people. And so you get eugenics issues coming out of that. And economics was complicit in a lot of the development of economic ideas. After giving up the radical egalitarianism of Adam Smith, economists started adopting some of these other ideas, and the idea of comparative advantage, unfortunately, came to be a tool in that wheelhouse. So reading a little history of economic thought has led me to question and challenge this overall idea of comparative advantage. I'm also reading some work by Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great Cities. So she was sort of an urban planner, but she also writes other works that were very interesting. And in those she challenges the basic paradigm that she calls it a neoliberal paradigm of international trade. If everything is being supported for reasons other than because the prices are explaining it to us, then I'm skeptical as well. She was talking about improving localism. Oftentimes when a city is overly planned by hierarchical planners, assumptions are made about what is going to be made in the cities and who's going to live where. Whereas when a city develops organically and emerges on its own, you get an entirely different structure for this city. A city that emerges organically tends to have a lot of mixed use buildings. So you'll have houses above stores, like apartments above stores. You'll have places to work close by to where people live instead of far apart from them, as we have now in suburbs. But people are switching back from suburbs to cities because they want to work closer to home again. She said that when you let things emerge organically without too much zoning or planning, people find their own way into this. All right, I've gotten far away from chapter 6 again. Probably because I'm not too fond of it. But let's see what we can do. Chapter 6 says that we start with the same kind of understanding of GDP as we were provided in earlier chapters, but now we're going to bring back in net exports. And the trick here is that the spending done by the people within the country is not necessarily equal to the output produced by that country. And similarly, the savings done within the country is not necessarily equal to the investment done by people within the country. Now, we have this basic framework for loanable funds markets, and we said that the interest rate brings the market for loanable funds into equilibrium such that those who are savers and that those who are investors, the market clears. So the savings is equal to investment. This model is going to say that savings doesn't always equal investment within a country if there's some of that savings is coming from abroad, or if some of that investment is coming from abroad. So the idea here is that instead of having a closed system where people are only interacting with people within that system, instead we've got an open system that is interested in what's happening in other places of the world. So moving from something that's closed to something that's open. And the trick is we still want to investigate what happens inside of the portion that used to be closed. We're most interested in what's happening within that section that was previously closed in relationship to the whole. This is interesting to me, again, a little bit philosophically, because it implies that the people who are making decisions about how to intervene in the marketplace within a given geography, so the politicians who are making decisions about how to intervene in the US economy are going to be more interested in how those interventions impact other Americans than they are going to be interested in how those interventions might possibly affect people in England, or how they might affect people in China or in Vietnam. Again, coming from my stupid, radically egalitarian point of view, I am equally concerned about how an intervention by the United States government influences somebody in China as I am about how it influences somebody in America. That's a normative position. But I am equally concerned. I'm going back again for a minute. I'm going back again for a minute to this here, okay? One of the things that could cause different countries to have different comparative advantages is that some countries might just have more people than other countries. Okay, then let people move. Right? If the reason why we can outsource manufacturing from the United States to other countries is because labor costs are low in those countries, maybe it's because those people can't move here. And maybe because they would want to. In that sense, are we exploiting those people? A little bit, although they wouldn't take the jobs unless they were better than what they already had on offer. That's not the thing that's exploitative. What's exploitative is the barrier that prevents those people from moving here. Now, maybe we have a nationalistic point of view that says we want to do that. That's again a normative situation. But if we had perfectly open borders, then a lot of the justifications for comparative advantage would disappear. A lot of these reasons for international trade would also go away. It's probably not politically feasible, but it's my class and I can talk about it if I want to. Okay, this difference between savings and investment, this residual in this overall equation that is that sets spending apart from output is sometimes identified as being generated by the market for net exports. So if we take this simple equation and rearrange it, we can say that, well, net exports is equal to output minus consumption, investment, and government spending. Net exports is exports minus imports. Okay, well, if exports are greater than imports, exports are greater than imports, then we have a trade surplus. Right? If exports are less than imports, we have a trade deficit. And this is where we've been in America for quite a while now, in a trade deficit. And just saying the word deficit sounds bad, and just saying the word surplus sounds good, but this is only if you're looking at one thing. This is only if you're looking at trade. Right? I have a trade surplus in economics lectures. I produce on net slightly more economics lectures than I consume. I still consume a lot of economics lectures. Listen to podcasts all the time. Right? Just need more econ. Okay. But on net, I tend to be a net exporter of economics lectures. I'm a net importer of food. Right? I buy more than I produce. The trick behind this exports thing is that when I say that when I have a trade surplus, I am exporting on net more of what than what I'm importing? Goods and services, right? Which goods and services? Yes, all of them. You might think about it in terms of exporting and importing GDPs, as if our entire economy was a machine that manufactures GDPs. You don't eat GDPs, but that's how we think about things when we move to aggregation. Okay. If this is true that I have a trade surplus, then it must also be true that I am on net a lender. Nope. Yep, I'm a lender. Why? Well, if I sell something to somebody abroad and they give me money, what am I going to buy with that money? On net, if Americans on net together sell more stuff abroad than they import from abroad, what are we going to do with all that extra money? And it's important that money isn't in our own dollars, that money is in the currency of the other country. You can only buy stuff in the other country with that money. Well, if I buy stuff in that country, then I'll import it. Well, or I can buy financial assets in that country, or financial assets that are denominated in the currency of that other country. And this is what happens, is that the capital accounts balance out, not perfectly, but over time, in the long run, balance out the surpluses in trade. So we see that there is a trade deficit in the United States right now. What does that mean? It means that we're importing more stuff than we're exporting. Well, why might that be the case? It has to do with the fact that foreigners, right, are buying financial assets here in the United States. Why would a foreigner want to buy a financial asset in the United States?
Safety.
Sorry?
Safety.
Safer, sure. Suppose you live. So, where do we want to pick on today? It's not picking on them. It's making political commentary. Right? Suppose you live in Greece. Suppose you live in Greece. and it turns out you got a good business, you're making a lot of extra money. But you're worried that if you invest in an institution in Greece, that the value of that asset might go down over time, or that inflation in Greece might be really bad, and so that your money won't retain its value. Then you might want to buy a safe asset somewhere else in the world where that asset won't lose its value as quickly, even though it might still be losing its value, at least it won't be losing value as quickly as the assets that are available to you in Greece. So you buy an asset in the other country. Okay, you buy that asset in the other country. Now that person in that other country has more of your money, what are they going to do with it? They're going to buy stuff from you or from other people in your country. So the investment in terms of financial assets and the flow of goods balances out.
I was just gonna ask, does like the lender or borrower model like apply in Europe where they like multiple countries have the same currency? Like how does that change
It would be less related to the currency per se, but more related to the availability of good, safe assets in those different countries.
Okay.
The fact that they share currency actually definitely complicates matters a good bit. So everybody would be equally likely to invest in European Central Bank bonds. But that also means that they would be equally unlikely to invest in European Central Bank bonds, and all equally more likely to invest in the United States Treasury bonds as compared to Euro bonds. So the fact that Greece is part of the EU means that many Germans are going to invest in the United States instead of in the EU. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how that plays out, but that's a good question. The text asks us to think about how to put this into the graph model. So if we take savings and investment, and if they're in equilibrium normally, right, they would be the same. And we use the interest rate to talk about that. If savings are fixed, then there's a straight up and down inelastic line for savings. Investment, we say, is sensitive to the interest rate, but savings is not sensitive to the interest rate in this model. There's no function for savings with R in it. We don't do that. Savings instead is defined as output minus the marginal propensity to consume times people's disposable income minus government spending. So whatever is earned that doesn't get consumed goes to savings. And again, notice investment is not in that. Okay. Instead, we say that investment has to do with the interest rate, and so we get a function for investment that is a downward sloping line. Why? Because the lower the interest rate, the more you invest. We kind of covered that a little bit last week. And so we find an equilibrium point where we find an interest rate at which markets would clear. However, if there is an opportunity to invest elsewhere and get a higher rate of return, like in some other country, then what will happen is that domestic savings and domestic investment will not be in equilibrium. But instead, right, these folks will invest in a foreign country and you will then also experience a trade surplus. So there's a net capital outflow. The U.S. buys, people in the U.S. buy foreign financial assets, then exports will be greater than imports. Okay. We might think about how other interventions into the macro world would influence this basic model. That's part of what the rest of chapter 6 gets into is, okay, well, what if government goes up or taxes go down? Well, if government spending goes up or taxes go down, right, then savings on net will decrease. And that will cut into, that'll have an effect on export flows, on trade flows. Now, this is what happens if the United States government intervenes. Big change. What happens if some other little country has some change in its marketplace? The question is, how strong does foreign activity influence American influence? This, if you think about the perfect competition model that is developed in your micro classes, you remember that small firms have very little influence on overall markets, but big firms are more likely to have an influence on the overall market, right? And so small countries are less likely to have a major impact on what happens in our country. But as being a very large country, the United States, we're more likely to have an impact on other countries. Now, as other countries get bigger and have more influence, then they also become more likely to have an impact on our market. So the outcome of this all is that policy that affects savings or investment will also affect trade. In the meantime, how do we see this? What shows up? Well, there's an impact on exchange rates. So this is the price of trade across countries, or across currencies. An exchange rate has to do with exchanging one currency for another. There is a nominal exchange rate. And oftentimes the nominal exchange rate is set by the government of a country. So how many dollars, right, can you trade for renminbi? Right.
6.39.
6.39. Has it always been that?
I know that previous years it's almost like 6.9. So this year has been decreased a lot.
It fluctuates. Now the question is there an open market for trade of dollars for renminbi? Maybe, but the Chinese government has a large amount of influence in those decisions. And the Chinese government can make it very difficult or prohibit the exchanging of currencies outside of a certain range of prices. In a normal currency market, the strike price for one currency in terms of another is negotiated in the market in the same way that anything else is negotiated. There's a supply curve, there's a demand curve, we come to some sort of equilibrium, and that's the price. What would it seem like would make sense for the exchange rate to be? What would the real exchange rate be? What would it mean for the real exchange rate to be in equilibrium? Suppose it costs, and we'll use this value for the Chinese currency for the time being, right? Suppose it costs $5 for a fast food meal at KFC in the U.S. It's a good example because KFC is very popular in China. I was in Shanghai and I was trying to meet a friend for dinner. We agreed to meet for hot pot, right, for dinner. And and it was in Shanghai on Nanjing Road, right? It's up the Nanjing Road. It's very, very busy road, lots of shopping malls. And it was during a vacation week when everybody was out of school. And so all the families took the week off and they all went on vacation somewhere, right? Super duper crowded, right? Super crazy. And I asked my friend, texting, right, with each other in China, where are you? And she says, it's upstairs from the KFC. There's like 30 KFCs on that road. Right? And I went up and down the stairs. I went into some places that I probably should not have gone into. Right? Like, this was not a safe place to go to, right? And out trying to find my friends at the hot pot place. Finally, I found it. It was fantastic. Okay. If a KFC meal in America costs $5, how much should we expect that same meal to cost in China? We would just take that 639 times 5, 15, 19, 31. All right, it should be 31 renminbi. Is it? Why might it yes be and why might it not be? What makes the economists say that it should be the same price? Or, first of all, why do I say that this is the same price as this? Because I can trade this for that and then trade that for that, right? It should be what we would call in economics the law of one price. Right? If it were not the case, then I could go, if the price of a KFC meal in China were much lower, let's say that it was 20 renminbi instead, right? I would go to China and buy a whole bunch of KFC meals and then deliver them to people in the United States and make money. Right? That's unrealistic because it would get cold. But usually we expect markets to equilibrate such that prices are the same across geographies. Why might that not be the case? It might be that chicken is, in general, less expensive in China. The resources that go into production, the costs of production are lower in China. It could be completely because the labor costs are lower in Shanghai than they are in Muncie. That's, well, it could be true, right? So I might have to find what portion of the costs there are common or different. But it's because there are difficulties in moving these goods across borders. And there's oftentimes also intervention in the exchanges. The government of China might say, you can't trade, right, $5 for 20 renminbi, right? You have to trade it for this. Now, if that's the case, and if the burger is, or the chicken meal is really this cheap, then every time I go to China, I can buy more after I exchange my money for renminbi than I would be able to buy with the same amount of purchasing power in the United States. We find that this is often true when people cross borders. It's cheaper to buy some things in Mexico, right? Okay. My daughter's in Mexico now, so she's enjoying her best life ever. I think the 20-minute ride from where she's staying to her school on Uber is like $3. And it's benefiting that person. Why is it benefiting that person? Because they can't move here. Okay. So we have these exchange rates across currencies, and these exchange rates are manipulated by governments such that the real exchange rate is not equal to the nominal exchange rate. And I've been going on and on about like sort of political stuff about this because this aggravates me to no end. The fact that governments do intervene in their money and that they do intervene in currency exchanges aggravates me to no end. It's cheating, it's lying, it's theft, it's expropriation, it's taking advantage of the little people. And I find it morally reprehensible. And so I'm extremely normative today. Okay, so we'll say that, if we have the KFC meal in Shanghai relative to the KFC meal in the US, right? That they should be equal to 1. And they should be equal to 1 in a way that the currency, right? The currency, once you exchange them for the other, they should be equal to each other. So you can buy the same stuff in the other country once you get there. But that's not always the case. All right, I'll talk a little bit more about this next time. Not a lot. You guys have already kind of done the homework to try to you've done the learning curve check, it's not the homework. I'll try to get a look at the actual homework. And as I explain the rest of this material, I'll try to explain it in a way that helps you to be able to. Thank you. Have a good day.